determination. Move my microphone a little closer to me. Just a bit. There we go. There we go. Okay. And I feel fine. The sounds of fire trucks and patrol cars echoed through the streets. The sky was dark, the air stale, and the many strong, cold gusts of wind bore mass amounts of dust and debris. I didn't envy the reporter her job, as she seemed mere moments from being blown off her feet. But, to her credit, she persevered. Behind her, there was the black shadow of an old man. The old man's shadow in the background began acting strangely, jumping in place and making various other aimless motions.
昨晩より全国各地で発生している巨大な黒い柱による出現被害につきまして、国土交通省は非常体制の災害対策本部および警戒本部を設置しました。各地方整備局管内の情報に基づく交通・河川の被災状況および対策状況は次の通りです。
柱の成分は専門家の分析でも解析不明の未知の鉱物の結晶のようで、エンティティウォール、霊体物質と名付けられています。地震計などでも全く予測のつかない場所に突如生えてくるため、多数の死傷者を出し、世間を混乱に陥れています。工事用カッターの刃も通らず、撤去もできない状況です。防衛庁は自衛隊の調査結果などから、先日まで上空に浮かんでいた黒い球体との関連を調査しています。
新しい避難場所の情報です。避難指示の出た地域にお住まいの方は以下の情報をチェックしてください。携帯サイト、ウェブサイトでも情報を発信しております。なお、ご覧の白い地域にある体育館や学校はすでに満員です。お近くの空きのある施設へ向かってください。
っていうか、前兆も速報もなくいきなり生えてくるんだ。避難も対策もねえんだよ。運が悪けりゃ死ぬだけだ。なんで警察はいつまでも公式発表してないんだよ。不祥事と取られるのが嫌なのか、それとも何か隠してるのか。
The middle-aged announcer was yelling at the top of his lungs, and in an absolute frenzy, he kicked his studio desk to the ground. The black shadow of a woman could be seen behind him.
委員長。
篠崎さん、あゆみちゃん。篠崎さん。生き返らせてくれてありがとう。みんな。だけど、もっといっぱい死んじゃったね。
The room grew dark, and each of the four figures who stood before me slowly melted into the blackness, becoming indistinct silhouettes.
持田も、中島も、岸沼も。
たくさん死んじゃったね。あれ？私たちも生き返ってないよ。あゆみちゃん。何がしたかったの
？I screamed and looked up. It was just a dream. I was at home watching TV. I scrunched myself up again, putting my face to my knees.
は全部意味のないことをしてたんだ。私どうすればいいの？生き返るって思ったから余生の家まで行って大怪我をしてお姉ちゃんまで失って帰ってきたのに。
I raised my face from my knees, eyes red and burning. Then, as if I hadn't already had enough tragedy in my life, I heard a loud crash just outside my house. It was unmistakably a car wreck, and a rather severe one at that. The car's alarm was going off, but I was trying my best to ignore it. I didn't need this right now, so I simply wasn't going to bother with it.
"次のニュースです。公益財団法人 PL 振興社の会長が失踪しました。
The car alarm outside was still going off, and it was getting harder and harder to ignore it by the second. Whoever was ringing my doorbell was really, really persistent. The irregular sound brought me back to reality. I crept over to the peephole and silently looked through it to see who'd be visiting me at this hour. On the other side of the door stood a man I didn't recognize. He had short hair, and he was pressing the chime frantically, as if his life depended on it. I was kind of creeped out. I moved away from the peephole. The persistent ringing continued for a bit, but then finally, thankfully, came to an abrupt halt. I slowly crept back to the peephole and took another look. The man was still there. He was just pacing back and forth in place in front of a house that, for all he knew, had no occupants. After another short while, he approached the door again and immediately put his eye right up to the outside of the peephole. The man moved his head away, but quickly replaced it with his finger, which he swirled around and around and inside the tight space as if trying to reach my eye or poke it out. Then he stepped away from the door. I could have taken this opportunity to slowly move away from the peephole, but I was oddly transfixed. Of course, the second I thought that, he came back to the door yet again. And yet again, he skipped the doorbell and went straight for the peephole. I grabbed the doorknob and was moments away from following through with that plan, when suddenly...
Ayumi? Satsuko? ダメ、開けちゃ。そいつ死者だ。
I slowly turned to look at her.
涅槃は死んだ人の世界。死後の世界がこっちに来る。
Then there was an oddly familiar sound. Another car accident. Again, right outside my door. This time, I looked outside through the peephole and saw the man from earlier, sandwiched between a car and the wall of one of the houses across the street. He was absolutely mangled. But after only a few moments, the man's corpse disappeared, leaving nothing but a shadow in its place on the wall and ground alike, a black stain.
なってるの？
Not that I even really had to ask.
涅槃の壁を壊したから。
I wasn't just asking myself, I was asking Sachiko, whose presence still remained just behind my back. But she just looked up at me with sad eyes.
今の人も死者真っ黒になって。
No, it couldn't be. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and forced myself to remain calm enough to access the photo, but then just stopped and stared. The photo displayed on my phone, which was now on the floor, no longer had just my friends from before with blacked out faces, but Mochida, Nakashima, and Kishinuma as well. I pounded the floor with both hands and shuddered violently.
悔い改めよ。世界は終わりに近づいている。神は不浄なる心得物を決してお許しにはならぬ。
Some cultist group was speaking on TV. I guess the news must have ended at some point when I wasn't paying attention.
世界の終わり。
This time, I was just plain talking to myself.
そう、終わりよ。まさか、ヤゴウラの最後の生き残りが自爆覚悟でこんなこと考えてるなんてね。
Magari appeared in my hallway. I had no idea how long she'd been there, nor how she'd gotten in. I noticed she still had her heels on, though. I stood up. And Sachiko was, as always, waiting in the wings behind me.
幸せの石で帰ってこれたわ。金付き堂の階段から吹き抜けを落ちてる間に。まあ、天神症が壊れたからこの石は使えないけど。
To demonstrate, Magari snapped the two together.
涅槃よ、死人を迎えよ。ほらね。
I probably flinched, but she was right. Nothing
世
happened.
界はもう数刻のうちに混沌に包まれて死の世界になる。あっけないでしょ。まさにこの世の終わりってやつ。ちなみにあれ、私の教団アレンジでしょ。我ながら弾くわ。
She pulled back her chin and flashed me a strained smile.
ああ、そういえばあなたの親もイカれて入信してたわよ。
This day couldn't have been much worse for me.
あなたこのままでいいわけ？
Magari wasn't mincing words, it seemed. I held my head in both hands and looked down at the ground.
責任を感じてるならちょっと顔貸しなさい。あんたの血に話がある。
Magari approached me and grabbed my arm. Sachiko, still right behind me, began to growl like a guard dog.
話してよ。どうして私なんか友達も救えない？何もできない。篠崎の血だか知らないけど私にできることなんて何もないよ。大体涅槃をこの世に出したのはヨシエさんが最初にやったことじゃない。
I screamed as loudly and as fiercely as I could.
私悪くないじゃない。
I closed my eyes and cried the hardest I've ever cried, sobbing so intensely that I found myself nearly hyperventilating. Magari slapped me down to the ground. I held my cheek and continued sobbing. Magari was looking down on me with contempt in her eyes, but also a certain intensity that seemed more akin to desperation than anything.
篠崎あゆみ、真実の一つを教えるわ。7番目の柱、知識のセフィラの軌道を止められなかった時点で、もう世界の終わりは動かない。だけど
Magari closed in on me as if our lips were about to touch. Sachiko growled again, but Magari was clearly not intimidated in the slightest.
ブック・オブ・シャドウズはまだ失われていない。あの本を手にした篠崎の血を引くあなたならミストとまだ戦えるかもしれないわ。
I was still hesitating, and Magari apparently didn't much like that.
ふざけやがって。
Suddenly, Magari was pulling up the top of my uniform. My plump, white stomach was now fully exposed.
そったれの本はここにあるわ。
She pointed to a spot just below my belly button. As she did so, my stomach started growling with an unearthly roar and shifted in place slightly. It was almost like there was a snake slithering around inside of me.
もっと早く気づけばよかったわ。篠崎義恵の家の地下で力を使ってからそこに潜り込んで眠ってやがったのよ、そいつは。
Magari crossed her arms and snorted.
ただしあくまで入れ物で中身は空っぽだけどね。生意気にうなってやんの。
The growl that came from within my own body sounded like that of a wild beast.
まさか本当に？あんたすっかり騙されたわ。私は本来教団からあなたがあの空間でブック・オブ・シャドウズを手に入れるためのサポート役、それとその他雑用のために派遣されていたのよ。そうなの？って言っても手に入れた瞬間奪い取るつもりだったけどね。まあそれも今となってはどうでもいいわ。世界が壊れるのなら教団の継承権もクソもないし。ただね、ムカつくのよ。ミストよ、ミスト。あれで勝ったつもりでいるなんて笑っちゃうわよね。そんなあいつを思いっきりなぶり殺してやりたいでしょ。あなたも甘ったれずにできることに目を向けなさい。可能性を放棄するのは死んだ後でいい。
My eyes began to well up yet again.
私にまだ何かできることがあるの？
Magari's expression turned deathly serious.
なんとしてもブック・オブ・シャドウズを体の外に出して支配なさい。本があなたの覚悟を認めれば自然と出てくるわ。そして本の力があればミストのいる涅槃にもう一度乗り込む道も示されるでしょうよ。
I could only stare incredulously at my abdomen. Magari took this opportunity to open my front door, again to illustrate her point. Outside, the weather was still completely anomalous, with hurricane-like winds and debris clouds everywhere. The clouds up above, too, were moving abnormally fast through a disconcerting blood-red sky. Every few seconds, a sound not unlike a spark plug firing could be heard echoing from the distance as another black flame ignited and burned itself out in some random spot.
どの道あなたも世界と共に滅びて死ぬわ。だったら見せてみなさい。その前にあなたの覚悟を。黒魔術から生まれたその本は残酷と血を好むわ。
With those parting words, Magari disappeared into the city, the sounds of her heels clacking softer and softer until they were no longer audible at all. Sachiko and I could do nothing but see her off. The entire nation was now plagued with entity walls and black silhouette-like spirits of the dead. The entity walls were rapidly destroying schools, downtown bypasses, and other crucial traffic cornerstones, and even rescue shelters, creating countless new casualties by the minute. People were running in the streets, panicked and confused, and almost certainly not much longer for this earth. Meanwhile, in Miss Kuon's office, the black-suited agents watched in horror as each TV monitor displayed a feed from a different news network across the world, and the story was exactly the same on all of them.
会長、私たちはどうすればよいのですか?
How is a book supposed to recognize my determination? What the hell am I supposed to do? There's a celestial globe on the table, one of Hinoe's favorite possessions. Oh, it's all scuffed up here. That must be from when I dropped it as a kid. I remember when that happened. Sis was just worried whether or not I was okay. She didn't say a thing about me damaging the globe. There are numerous books on the shelf relating to magic and the occult. Hinoe had quite a collection. Sis...
私に力を貸して。
In front of the mirrored dresser sat Hinoe's zodiac dagger. I gripped it in terror, closed my eyes, and started shaking.
なんとしてもブックオブシャドウズを体の外に出して支配なさい。黒魔術から生まれたその本は残酷と血を好むわ。
I couldn't back down now. I lifted the dagger in front of me, poised to plunge it into my body and carve myself open as samurai once did in the ritualistic suicide called seppuku. But I couldn't go through with it. I was too scared of death, too scared of the pain. The face that reflected back at me in the mirror was twisted with fear. I didn't even recognize myself. But I could see in those eyes all the weight that had been put on my shoulders, all the responsibility I'd been forced to bear. My mind was made up. I lifted the dagger again, only to bring it halfway to its destination before halting its descent once more. No matter how determined I was, no matter how strong my conviction, this was literally suicide. I knew it had to be done, but knowing and accepting are two different things. I began crying like a baby. This was the most afraid I'd ever been in my entire life. and almost certainly the most afraid I ever would be. At this point, the only way I'd be able to go through with it was to clear my mind and let my arms make the motions automatically. And before I knew it, that's exactly what I did. It's most likely because I wasn't thinking about it, or anything else for that matter, that the dagger found absolutely no resistance. It was like applying excess force to slice a cake. For a very brief moment, I felt nothing. But then the convulsions started, first in my abdomen, then quickly spreading up to the rest of my body. My abdomen was now spasming and constricting involuntarily. And the rest of me wasn't faring much better. My entire body was in total chaos. The extent of the agony I'd felt at that moment was absolutely impossible to convey. It was all-encompassing. I was utterly incapable of focusing on anything else. My lower body was spewing bright red blood, thick black blood, and an unknown yellow substance, all of which were blending together into a slurry that was, at its core, my life essence. This went far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The sheer shock of it rendered my mind a jumble that I simply could not untangle. I knew there was a reason I'd done this to myself, something I absolutely had to do, and it was crucial. But regaining enough cognitive function to do it would be a challenge. My head was swimming as I tried, beyond all reasonable measure, to hang on to consciousness, just long enough to complete the task at hand. I could still see my face in the mirror, but only just, as the blood that had been spurting from my abdomen had largely glazed it over. It was a truly frightful sight, comparable to, if not more disturbing than anything I'd seen in Heavenly Host. I felt feeble, helpless, and the face in the mirror was smiling at me for it, darkly, obscenely. Jet black crows flew by outside the window, and in that moment, a fire sparked within me. Feeling oddly resolute, I gripped the dagger jutting out from my abdomen. And yanked it to the side with every last bit of strength I had left in me. The spray of blood gushing out of me became almost exponentially more violent. Most surprisingly, it seemed like equal amounts of blood were rushing to my brain as well, and the effect was of feeling like the blood vessels in my head were on the verge of bursting. But just as I felt like I was moments from my final blackout, I saw something. There, among my own entrails on the ground, was a blood-drenched tome. It was the Book of Shadows, without question. My vision blurred from the intense loss of blood, and even more intense pain. I fell forward, unable to maintain any semblance of balance any longer, and I landed right on it. With a loud, warm, and unpleasant splash, my face planted firmly into the book, which was steaming under the odd temperature differentials of my viscera. I awoke with a start. I was still in Hinoe's room. Instinctively and frantically, I looked down at my abdomen. There, I saw a scar resembling the ones I'd almost died from during the blowback at Yoshie Shinozaki's house, runic lettering and all. But that was it. The bleeding had stopped. In fact, there was no blood anywhere in the room, and on the floor in front of me sat the Book of Shadows. Not a copy, but the original. I slowly touched it, and from behind me, Sachiko spoke. She was staring at me with a docile, almost reverent look in her eyes. I picked up the book and looked at it, fear and awe running through my now clear head. It grumbled a bit, darting its eyes back and forth. Eventually, it seemed to settle in a specific direction, locking its gaze. It seemed to be looking out the window.
世界はもう終わりました。
世界はもう終わりました。お父さん、お母さん。
世界はもう終わりました。
世界はもう終わりました。
Dad and Mom both just repeat the same line over and over again, like a broken tape recorder.
お母さん。きっと私帰ってくるからね。